Okay, I see more and more people. It looks like someone from Louisiana. Awesome. Welcome, Bill. Welcome, Mario. Hey, Chris. California Delta. So cool. Kind of a nice mix of places. Again, if you're just joining us, we'll get started right at 6 my time, 7, 8, 9, depending on where you live. So another minute or so. I see a bunch of people piling in right now. Cool. And it looks like, just since you guys can't see the poll results, it looks like a lot of people from the Midwest, a lot from the South. There's a couple from Canada, Northwest. That's where I'm from. I'm from Spokane, Washington. We'll talk about that too soon. A lot from the West, Rhode Island, Fort Bragg, North Carolina, Grand Lake, Marshalltown, Iowa. Okay, cool. So nice mix. So, again, this is going to be on pre-spawn fishing. So, obviously, depending on where you live, the pre-spawn's a different time of year. Kind of move that a little bit. And like I said, I start right on time. So still got a couple minutes. Yeah, so nice mix, like I said. And I don't know if you guys have seen the other webinars. This is my third and final for the year. I'll probably maybe do another one this year, but I typically do 3 a year. Okay, cool. So a lot of people are still joining. So we're just gonna get started here. Okay, we'll go and share the results, just see how that looks for you. So yeah, so it's kind of a nice mix, a lot from the Midwest. So we'll go ahead and get started with the intro. So my name is Tyler Brinks, and I work with Navionics. This is my 5th year working for them. I'm also an outdoor writer. I'm also a tournament angler. I also work for a lot of different companies in the fishing industry, but really fishing is my life. And I'm here today to talk about pre-spawn bass fishing with you guys. And again, if you're just joining, this will be recorded. It will be on my YouTube page, which is youtube.com/Tyler Brinks. Navionics will also put it up probably tomorrow. And then if you have any questions, feel free to ask them at any time. If it's something related to what we're talking about, we'll go ahead and jump right into it and answer it. And if not, we'll go ahead and do it at the end. So feel free to ask any question you have. Yeah, I know, Mario went fast. I mean, one year I did 6 of them, which is maybe a little bit too much. 3 seems like not much, so it's going pretty quick. I did January, February, and March, because my plan is to be fishing so much after this that I'm almost too busy to do them, but that's how it goes. So we are going to go ahead and share the screen and get into the presentation. Okay, so again, this is pre-spawn bass fishing tips. Real quick too, so my email right there, it's tbrinks@navionics.com. If you want to ask me any questions afterwards, feel free to. I always respond to them. It could be about Navionics, it could be about bass fishing, it could be whatever, but that's my email, and I try really hard to respond to them quickly. So we're going to talk about the agenda. So, I mean, the biggest thing is defining pre-spawn, and, simply put, it's before they spawn. I used to live in Florida. I don't know if you guys caught it, but I live in Washington State now, but in Florida, it was totally different than here. Pre-spawn here is typically a lot shorter. In Florida, it's basically pre-spawn and spawn, because they're spawning like most of the year. And that happens in a lot of the southern states. So the pre-spawn period, it can be a lot longer, and there's always fish kind of in that pre-spawn period. Whereas a colder climate, that pre-spawn is a lot more defined. And we'll get into that with, what I call the mini seasons, different water temperature ranges, because each stage they're going to be doing something different. And like I said, I noticed a lot of you guys are from the Midwest, a lot from the Northwest as well. So it's going to be pretty similar to my climate, which is, it's a little bit, I mean, it's really cold. I mean, not a little bit, it's cold. And that period's a little bit more, there's a lot more defined changes. So we'll talk about some approaches, talk about bait selection. I'll show you some of my favorite baits, locations, and then, like I said, Q&A as well. So when is pre-spawn? Kind of like I just kind of skipped right over that, just what I was talking about in the last one. It's just right before they spawn. And, it typically occurs around 60 degrees, 65. I always used to read that 62 degree mark is like the magic number for largemouth. It's not always that exactly like that, but generally that's when they're going to be spawning. So my pre-spawn period that I consider is, that 45 to 50 up to 60 to 65. And typically this is the best time of year to catch the biggest fish of the year, because they're all coming shallow to spawn. So there's no other time of year when every big fish in the lake is going to be moving shallower because they're spawning. So it's a very good time to catch a big fish, and they're also really fat because they're getting ready to spawn. So, like I said, it varies based on region. Around here in Spokane, typically May is a very good month for both spawn and pre-spawn. April is definitely pre-spawn, just depending on the season. And I know like I said, I lived in Florida before, so that was like January was like the prime time to spawn. I also lived in Nevada when I grew up, and it was March. So it's always different based on where you live. So, you know, that March and April in the Southwest, April, May here, December to February in the South. So it's going to be, you know, wherever you live, it may be pre-spawn right now. They may be getting ready to go to bed on beds. So, you know, there's still going to be something for you in this if they have started spawning. So, you know, another thing too is, you know, each of the 3 major bass species are all very, very different. You know, typically smallmouth spawn sooner and deeper. You know, that's my experience, you know, but they also will get very shallow as well, but generally just a little bit deeper. But I've caught them in a foot of water on beds, you know, so they do that, and smallmouth are a lot easier to catch on beds. But again, we're talking about pre-spawn, so we're going to talk about some approaches for them. Again, largemouth later and shallower. Spotted bass, I've caught some, but I haven't really had too much experience with them during the pre-spawn and spawn, but they are deeper and different, more like a smallmouth. So really, this time of year, this whole pre-spawn in general, the major things that I'm gonna look for are flats, you know, because that's where they want to spawn. They want to spawn on something flat. So adjacent to those flats is always a good place to look anytime when you're talking about pre-spawn for any of these species. And just because it's a flat, it could be a, you know, 2-foot flat for largemouth or a 5-foot flat that smallmouth are going to be on. Close to that, adjacent to it, so you can target it during the pre-spawn. You know, places like bays are also very good, or coves, or, you know, inlets, or whatever you call it. Those are always good right outside of it for pre-spawn, or creeks, you know, because they're going to be going up into there to spawn. So we'll talk about some maps later on and show you some spots, and I'll point out some good and bad areas, or maybe not bad areas, but some good areas. We're going to talk about some other things that are always good to look for, you know, like sand and small rock. You know, that's always good for smallmouth. And really just the whole pre-spawn approach is close to where they're going to spawn. So I'm talking within sight of where they're going to spawn. You know, that's where I like to be. Position my boat within, you know, almost casting distance from where they're going to eventually spawn, because they want to get up there so bad, they want to spawn. So during the pre-spawn, they're going to be, each step, they're going to be getting closer and closer to where they want to spawn. So, you know, you're just going to get closer and closer to it where you're right next to it eventually. Okay, so, you know, kind of moving along, we'll talk about some of the different mini seasons, as I call them, you know. So these are kind of how I break them down, because each of them are going to require both a different approach and a different bait selection. So, you know, the 45 to 50, and again, if you live in the South, you know, that 45 to 50, you know, may never even happen, but, you know, generally that's a good trigger for them to start moving shallower. 50 to 55, you know, that's actually probably my favorite range, because they are going to eat everything. They're going to chase baits. They're getting antsy to spawn. And we will talk about that a little bit more in a second. 55 to 60, that's another range. And then also right before they spawn. So that 45 to 50, you know, that's really just that last part of winter. I mean, that's where I live. It's still a week or so away. I mean, I'm hearing a lot of that 40 to 45 degree temperatures from my buddies that have been out, and some colder, but, you know, it's just getting close to that, to what I'd consider pre-spawn. Before that, I'd still consider it a winter approach. You're still going to be fishing a lot deeper, but, you know, once it hits that 45 to 50, those fish are going to be moving up. You know, it's that first move towards the bank, and typically that is an awesome time to catch a really big one, because, you know, they are hungry. They've been not eating very much during the winter. They're ready to get up and eat, because that whole spawning process, you know, it could take weeks. So they're not going to eat hardly at all, or not at all when they're spawning. They know that, their body knows that, so they're going to be eating as much as they can. You know, crankbaits are great, jerk baits and jigs. You know, this is one I caught a few years ago. It's pretty dang cold out, but red crankbait, which is another thing that I don't think is in my slide, but red during the pre-spawn always seems to be awesome. You know, there's a lot of reasons for that. You know, one, crawfish, you know, they're going to eat a bunch of them. Water clarity is usually a little bit muddier during the spring, you know, just because that's how it is. So red seems to be a good color. So, you know, again, like if you guys are just joining us, I see some more people joining us. Go ahead and answer questions or ask questions at any time. We will get to them. You know, I see those, and we will maybe take a break and look at them. If not, we'll get them all at the end. Okay. So, you know, once it hits that 50 to 55 degree, you know, they're a lot more active. Like I said, that's my favorite time during the pre-spawn to catch them. You know, they're getting ready to eat, you know, and it's some of the best fishing of the year. You know, this is another example of a red crankbait. You know, it's a lipless, but you know, that time of year, it just really does well. And you know, it's also a time when you could see a lot of fish shallow cruising, you know, fish sunning in shallow water. You know, they want to get as warm as they can and eat too. So they're looking for, you know, possible spawning locations. They're trying to warm up. I've heard things like, you know, they're trying to warm up their eggs to get it moving a little bit. I mean, who knows the case, but this time of year, there's a lot of cruising fish. I'm not really going to specifically talk about that in bait selection, but number one bait for that for me is using some kind of wacky rig. Anytime you see cruising fish, you know, that's really my go-to, you know, so wacky rig, Senko or a Nico rig or anything along those lines is great when you see cruising fish, you know, because you could cast there. It's not so loud. You can present it right in front of them. So that's just kind of a side note. If you see cruising fish, really any time of year, that's number one for me. I mean, drop shot would be another one, but if they're, you know, more higher up in the water column, it's not quite as good as a wacky rig. So it's definitely a good thing. So I'll get back to that. I'm getting a little distracted here. Let's see if I can pull these, see if there's any questions there. Okay, so cool. We do have some questions, looks like. Okay, okay, cool. So, you know, I guess the water temperature is pretty close to, you know, what I'm experiencing here, even all over the place. Like Mario said, it's 48. Kenny's in Grand Lake of the Cherokees in Oklahoma, about 48 there too. So yeah, you're definitely in the range for pre-spawn. I mean, like what we're talking about. And Big Nasty, I am sorry. That's his screen name. I don't just call some guy Big Nasty, but Big Nasty 06. He says greetings from snowy New Jersey. So Mario, best bait for cruising bass. Yeah, definitely a regular Gary Yamamoto Senko. Move this a little bit. There's a bunch of beer over there that I have, so that's awesome, huh? Okay. All right. So if you have any other questions, just keep sending them. I'll keep this up so we can see it. Oh yeah, good question, Mario. So a wacky rig for a Senko. You know, Texas is good to it, but I just think that wacky rig is going to fall a lot slower. It has a lot more action. It's different than a lot of people are doing. So definitely go with the wacky or Nico. Or Neko is actually what it's supposed to be called. Okay, so we're talking about wacky rigs. So Anthony says, what is your favorite wacky rig hook? So I like a few of them. I like the Owner one. It's kind of a weird color. It's like, it's not black, it's not nickel. It's like a greenish color. It has a double weed guard on it, I believe. Yeah, that one has a double. But it's kind of it's almost like a drop shot hook. It's pretty small and compact. It hooks them really good. But I have been using the VMC Nico hook a lot lately, and I like that one a lot. That's a good one. And Mario, weightless. He asked if I add any weight to it. Once in a while I will do, but he said weightless or wacky jig, like a weighted jig head. I'm either going to do straight weightless or just a nail inside one of them, like a Rains tungsten nail weight. I'll put that in there. Okay, cool. So we got some good questions. We'll just jump right in. We'll keep going with this because I like this. Kind of break it up a little bit. So Chris said, what color jerk bait for 45 to 50 degrees? I'm pretty basic. You know, this is one that I have right here. It's all tangled up with a bunch of other baits. This is one that I was using the other day. It's just kind of you can see it's really kind of clear and translucent. This is a Rapala Shadow Wrap, but I like those kind of subtle colors, definitely. You know, but I also like the perch colors as well. So it just kind of depends, but this is one I was just trying out, and I do like that color because it's, you know, pretty natural looking. Okay, good question, Doyle. You know, it's okay. Yeah, the question is what's the water temperature? Where is it measured? Best thing is from your Lowrance, you know, that's the transducer, which is either on the trolling motor or down, you know, on the bottom of the boat. You know, that's going to measure all that stuff and get the temperature. Okay. Okay, so Jonathan, yeah, you're like right in my situation. He says his situation is 45 degrees right after ice out. You know, we have a tournament this weekend that we had to move because the other lake was still frozen, and the other lake is about 44, 45. So for me, that's going to be what we're going to talk about here in a minute. With some of the bait selection, I'll make sure to point that out. But really, I would say jerk bait is number one. And Kenny, yeah, I mean, a lot of the lakes are in my area are clear, and you know, some are a little bit dirtier, but generally they're pretty clear. Okay, so cool. So again, you guys keep asking questions, and we'll go back to this. Okay, so we kind of got off track there a little bit. Okay, so then the other period is right before they spawn, and again, we're going to circle back and talk about baits and all that stuff. But you know, right before they spawn, that's a great time because some fish are pre-spawn, some are actually spawning, and some are post-spawn. You know, so really that's going to be a shallow situation for me. Another thing too is don't count on top water. You know, when that water is like 55 to 60 or 65, you know, you could still throw top water. Fish are aggressive and hungry and shallow, and that's a good thing to throw. Buzz baits, poppers especially. You know, popper is an awesome bait right before they spawn, when they spawn, and after they spawn. Okay, as promised, we're going to jump into lure selection. Okay, so really I keep it pretty simple and keep it moving. You know, all the baits that are shown on this background here, you know, these are baits that I use a lot. This is actually, we had a tournament a couple years ago that I won, and these are the 3 baits that I use, exact baits, and that's why they're in this picture. So we have a diving crankbait, squarebill, and then a jig. And even with the jig, I like to keep it moving just because I like to hit as many targets as I can. So not really move it fast, but pitching it, letting it fall, work it a couple times, move it up and pitch it. It's just I mean, I do fish kind of fast, but that's what I like to do until I could find where those fish are, especially when the pre-spawn. Because another thing is, they're going to be a lot of times, those fish are going to be grouped up when you find the right location. There's going to be a lot of them in that same spot. So once you catch one, then you can slow down. Jerk bait, talk about some of my favorites. I showed you that one. Jigs, chatterbaits, not chatterbats, as I said there, crankbaits, and swimbaits. So jerk baits, and if you guys caught my last webinar, we talked about some jerk baits. You know, that was a cold water bass fishing, and this is actually the same slide from it, just not being lazy, but it's still something that I use a lot during the pre-spawn. So I use a lot of long pauses. As it gets warmer, I'm going to shorten the length of that pause. But this is a good color. Someone asked me earlier some of my favorite colors. This is a perch color from IMA. It's IMA Flit 120. I think this one's called green perch, if I remember right, but that's a really good color. Clear water, dirty water, because it puts out a lot of flash, but it also looks like a perch. So late in the year, I use them as well. I like a lot of the slender jerk baits. You know, this is I'm not sure exactly how long it is, but you know, like the IMA Flit 120, this is about a 110 size, like the Vision 110 and the Spro mixed stick. But I also like bigger jerk baits, you know, especially this time of year. It's kind of, this picture's kind of deceiving, but this bait is giant. It's a 130 size, and it's really thick. I mean, it dwarfs this thing. Let's see if I have any of, no, I don't know where I put them, but it's just a really big bait. You know, I also use the, this is a Depths Ballast Long Minnow, and then also a Lucky Craft Pointer 128. You know, they're a lot bigger baits, and really it just offers a bigger meal for big fish. Like we talked about earlier, you know, they're going to be getting hungry they are hungry because they're getting ready to spawn. So that's the time of year when I really like those big jerk baits. You know, and you can get, you know, kind of a more aggressive action, you know, more of a wide side-to-side action versus this, which kind of darts back and forth. You know, also because just the size of it, you're going to get a lot more flash. You're going to attract fish from a further distance. And really, I just do everything except the same as with the little ones, except I upsize my gear. So instead of using, you know, 8 to 12, I'm going to be using 12 or 15 pound tests just because of the sheer size of those baits. So, and then instead of a medium light, it's going to be more like a straight medium, or even a medium heavy rod, or even more like a cranking rod. But it's definitely a time when there's a window to catch really big fish on a jerk bait that want a bigger bait. Okay, so with jigs, you know, like I said, one of my favorite things is to flip and pitch cover. You know, it could be anything from stumps to docks, or anything that's, again, close to where they're going to spawn. It's a great way to catch them. One of my favorite jigs is right here. It's just all black. This is a tungsten one, Eco Pro tungsten, but I also like the dirty jigs. This is a bait that I always have tied on no matter what, but definitely during this time of year. And this is just a Super Chunk Junior from Zoom, but I like that all black. But, you know, I also like black and blue. I like, you know, green pumpkin. I mean, a lot of times when you're pitching jigs, I don't think color matters at all. I think it's just getting it in front of a fish and being in the right place where those fish are. So, you know, I will flip and pitch a lot of cover, but also cast jigs to deeper breaks, once again, close to where they're going to spawn. So, you know, if you have a flat and then it drops down, you know, you could actually cast there. And if there's any isolated cover that's deeper, it's even better. I also switch up my trailer a little bit as it gets warmer. It's definitely something that I do. You know, I change it and I make it, you know, something with a lot more flapping action, you know, maybe something with a lot more appendages, you know, something bigger, you know, more aggressive as it gets warmer. You know, and I just said color doesn't matter, and then I just say match the hatch, but, you know, that is a general rule of thumb. If you're questioning colors, you know, just make it look like something they're going to eat. And then one other tip I put in there is dye your tips. Like, say on this one's kind of a bad example because it's black, but if it's a green pumpkin, you know, just a little bit of chartreuse dye on the end, you know, just makes it kind of stand out. And that's one thing I will do to modify my color. Okay, let's see if we got any other questions. Okay, cool. A lot of questions here. Jonathan, we are going to get to the swim bait for sure. Okay, RJ, California water temps are 53 to 55 with a few fronts moving in. How are those types of situations? I mean, that's a great time because those fish are, even with fronts coming in, they want to spawn. They are so close. So I would say, you know, again, kind of that more aggressive action for sure. You know, moving baits, that'd be my best approach. Okay, Chris, another good question. For pre-spawn and spring fishing, do you prefer cloud cover or bluebird skies? Generally, I always want cloud cover, always. I mean, just no matter what the situation, just because it breaks up the light. There is one example of when I don't, but I'll talk about that in a second. But the cloud cover is always going to be good to give you an advantage over the fish as far as visually seeing things. So that's kind of my answer to that. But the bluebird skies, the sunny skies, the only time I like that is if I guess if I'm looking for bedding fish, just so I can see them better. But definitely if I'm fishing under docks, it will position them under docks better. But generally I'd pick cloud cover. If it could be cloudy every day versus sunny every day, I'd pick cloudy for sure. Okay, another good question following up with my more aggressive trailer. And this is just another general thing, but you know, like this is a pretty subdued trailer. It's a super fluke, or not a super fluke, I think I said that earlier, Super Chunk Junior. On this one is a Rage Menace grub, which doesn't have a lot of action, but as I would get to more aggressive, it's gonna be something like a double tail grub or a bigger trailer. I would say around that 55-degree mark is when I kind of bulk up and then get that more aggressive action. And I'll also use a lot of the brush hogs as well. You know, that's one of those baits that I dye the tips of, but those make a really good jig trailer. You know, I cut it down a little bit, but it has all kinds of appendages on it. That brush hog, I don't know why I'm holding that one up, but that's another good thing to add to the back of it. Okay, cool. I like all these questions. This is a nice little way to break it up. Okay, muddy water, you know, that's, you know, cold and muddy water, they've always said is like the worst. And it really is. It's hard because, you know, it just stays colder or whatever the case. I mean, the clear water is usually better when it's cold. It allows you to throw things like jerk baits where it's harder to do in muddy water. Muddy water does have an advantage though, because you're able to kind of, about the cloud situation, it gives you an advantage for sight. So you can kind of sneak up on fish a little bit more, present baits and kind of surprise them. Yeah, Mario, that Rage Menace is awesome. This is on a swim jig, which is another one that's not really in this presentation, but a swim jig, this exact one, a dirty jigs, black and blue with the Rage Menace, catches me a lot of fish during the spring. And, you know, with the swim jig, since I'm talking about it, you know, I'm going to be looking for like the first isolated or just the first emerging lily pads. That's what I always throw this around. But even emerging grass, just anything that's new during this pre-spawn, this is a great way to catch them. Kind of a side note there. But I also use this white one too with this would be more like your muddy water, Michael, something with that's this color. Black and blue would work too though. Okay. Chaz, good question about mop jig. You know, generally my experience with the mop jig, and if you guys aren't familiar with that, it just has a huge skirt on the end of it. You know, that's something that I use a lot more in the summertime, offshore, deeper water, dragging, things like that, but I don't see why it wouldn't work. Another good question. I like this. Roger, you know, he says you really focus on the afternoon during the pre-spawn. You know, it just depends on the situation. I'd rather fish in the afternoon just because it's going to be the warmest part of the day, you know, but if I'm out there in a tournament or out there all day or can only go in the morning, I'm just going to have to deal with it. But generally the afternoon is going to be better the later in the day because the water's had a time to warm up. So it's really a good, I mean, it's better for sure. It's kind of opposite what you think of when, you know, like summertime, you want to get out there first thing in the morning. A lot of times that best fishing is, you know, that 4 or 5, 6 o'clock in the afternoon, or maybe not that late if it's dark, but you get what I'm saying. Okay, we're going to jump back to this, but I do see your question, Mario, and we'll get to it. Okay. Chatterbaits is another one that I really love, and you know, it's my favorite time of year to use them is the pre-spawn period. You know, and kind of like what I said earlier, I keep it simple: green pumpkin or black and blue. You know, steady retrieval work okay. You know, just cast and reel it. It's really a lure that you can fish without thinking about it too much. But I do pop it once in a while just to give it a little bit different action, or if I feel it bump into something, that's usually when the strikes occur. So I'll either just pop it a little bit just to give it a little bit different action. I like the Z-Man original ones, or not the original one, but the ones from Z-Man. There's a Tackle Warehouse custom one that is really good, and the Project Z. I haven't used that jackhammer one yet. It's like 17 bucks. I don't know if I ever will, but it's a lot of people really like it because it has, you know, different hook and really good action and all that stuff. But if you're going to pick one, I would say that Project Z or the Tackle Warehouse custom is a really good chatterbait. And then I use the same Rage Menace most of the time on the back. I mean, it's a good trailer for chatterbaits too. Okay, another one I stole from the last presentation, but these flat crankbaits are really good, you know, when the water is about 50 or so. It just has a tighter wobble, and you could use them when it's colder, but when it's 50, that seems to be the magic number. You know, I personally use balsa more than plastic, but I have learned that they break all the time. This was a picture of my DT, Rapala DT6s, and there's a few 10s in there, but I've lost most of these since then because you just lose them all the time, or you break them all the time. So kind of a good replacement would be the I'm a Pinjack 200, or this one over here. This is the Strike King KVD flat 1.5. Again, look, it's red. But yeah, this is a really good one too. You know, this one dives a little bit deeper. I'd say maybe 8 feet, but it's really good. You know, and a lot of times these crankbaits are a little bit harder to cast because they're lightweight, they're thin, or they're balsa. So I would use like a lighter line, like a 10-pound, just to get them down a little bit deeper. Okay, so Squarebills is an awesome time. 55 to 65 is a great time to do it. You can use it later in the year or earlier. But the number one thing for me is to bang it into cover, reel it quickly. Don't be afraid of it getting hung up. I found that, and I've heard this from other people too, the faster it deflects off something, the less likely it's going to get hung up. It sounds crazy, but it's really true. You know, you don't want to lose all your baits, but if you're reeling it really slow and just kind of graze it, those hooks will get it. Otherwise, if you're reeling it fast, the bill will deflect and it will shoot off pretty far either way. So I like a few of them. I mean, the IMA Squarebill is awesome. The KBD 1.5, the Arashi one. I mean, there's just a lot of good Squarebills out there. So just pick whichever one you like. They're a great bait this time of year. Moving out a little bit, mid-range crankbait. This is my wife. This is one she caught on the Duo M62. And it's, you know, I'm talking about like those 6 to 12 foot for staging fish that are wanting to move shallow, that are wanting to spawn. You know, again, you want to cover water, and you need to stay slightly off the bank and try to stay in that 6 to 12 foot range. Really, with crankbaits of any depth, you know, unless I'm talking about the Squarebill, you want to be fishing shallower than how deep it dives, if that makes sense. So if the bait will dive to 8 feet, you want to be fishing into 6 feet because you want that bait to be hitting the bottom and banging into the bottom and hitting stuff. Deflection is always the key. So whatever depth it is, go with something that dives a couple feet deeper than that. You know, you want to cover water, like I said. You know, those pre-spawn fatties are just, again, waiting to move up to the bank. So like that Duo bait's really good, the Rapala DT10 and the IMA Beast Hunter. That's actually a pretty big crankbait that looks like it would dive like, it's like almost like the size of a like a 6XD, but it will really only go down like 12 or 14 feet. So it's a really good bait. So yeah, we had a question about swim bait. So here we go. Big swim baits. You know, typically this is one of the best times to do it, again, because those fish want a big meal. So baits like this Huddleston 68, you know, it's a great bait to throw, you know, when you want a really big fish. You know, and again, you could fish it slowly on the bottom, you know, but don't be afraid to throw it everywhere. You know, I've caught fish around docks on it, you know, and even smaller fish will eat it. I mean, I've caught a smallmouth on one of these, so you know they will attack it. There's definitely you know, a time and place for it. They work throughout the year, but you know, this time of year especially, they're really good. They're also good in the winter too, if you don't have ice on your lake. But they're really good bait when fish want that big meal, that easy meal. So, you know, the regular swim baits, you know, and typically you're going to fish them the same. This is actually the Optimum Boom Boom swim bait, and there's a smaller one even. This is a 6-inch, there's a 4.5-inch, and then the Kitex. You know, and the cool thing about these is you can use them with regular tackle. You know, you can grab your jig rod that has 15-pound test on it and tie one of these on. You don't need a giant swim bait rod like this one, you know, 7-Eleven extra heavy. You don't have to have it, and it's not as intimidating for some people as well. You know, as far as size, you know, even though those big swim baits, you know, will still catch smaller fish, you know, just throwing, you know, smaller bait, you're going to probably catch more as well. But, you know, those are some of my favorites. And I typically, I don't know if you guys saw my other webinar on swim baits, but I think that was last year. A lot of times during the fall, I'll use Kitex on a really heavy jig head. This time of year, I like to fish them on a weedless rig because I'm going to be fishing them, you know, like a weighted swim bait hook, because I fish them really shallow. I like to skip them under docks. I like to skip around logs, and those jig heads will hang up. You know, so will this guy right here with this treble hook. There is a weedless version of this bait as well, which I really like. Side note, but it's a good bait. Okay, before we get into the locations and screenshots. Okay, cool. Yeah, I know Mario. I'm very lucky. She fishes. She's awesome. Okay. Oh, Bill, I haven't tried that. He said he likes that Z-Man Freedom, the Freedom Tackle. Freedom Tackle, I don't know if you guys know, but they have a really cool concept where it's basically you could screw the head into it and change the hook on it. It's really cool, and it's like a swinging jig head, or swinging hook, I should say. But they and Z-Man work together on a chatterbait. I've never used that one, Bill, but I really like the Freedom Tackle stuff. Okay, Jonathan said, have you ever tried slow rolling a spinnerbait single Colorado with a spinnerbait trailer in pre-spawn? He did well on it. You know, that is actually a good approach. You know, I've really, with the advent or with the popularity of swim jigs and Squarebills and swim baits, I really don't use a spinnerbait near enough, but I have caught a lot of them in the past on what you're talking about exactly. Not necessarily with the swim bait trailer, but that Colorado blade. You know, that's a great approach for pre-spawn fishing for sure. So I would say definitely keep that up. And then kind of a side note for that too is, you know, everyone else is throwing a Squarebill and a chatterbait and swim baits, so they're not used to seeing those swim bait or spinner baits quite as much. Oh, okay, I missed that one. Okay, another question said, their home lake is a reservoir, deep, where there isn't a lot of structure. How would you work a jig on those break lines? You know, so if there's not a lot of structure, you know, depth changes are, you know, basically like a form of structure, you know, of drop. So if it's drops from 5 to 10 feet, I mean, that's something that fish can relate to. It's different. So, you know, looking for those kind of things is what I would do. How would you work the jig on the break lines? It would just kind of depend on the depth. You know, if it's shallow enough, you know, I'd say less than 10, I would still pitch it, you know, pitch the dark spots, pitch any difference and just let it fall. I mean, just like you're pitching to shallow cover, just deeper. If it's a lot deeper, I would say just dragging it along that area, you know, casting it out there and dragging it through that depth change. Or if you could find any type of change, like I said, maybe there's one stump or grass or an underwater point or anything that's going to be different, I would say that would be a good place to look. Okay, and then we're going to, again, if you guys have any questions, I'm going to ask them now. I'm going to see if we have any more come in. I'm just taking a second break here, and we'll jump into some maps and show you some prime locations of lakes that I fish and that I like to catch fish on. Okay, so You know, one thing about the Navionics maps, if you have it on the app or your card, is, or even really just a map in general, you're going to be able to see likely areas pretty easily just by the contour lines. So spawning areas are typically going to be shallow, like we talked about, and they're also going to be flat. So you can see how thick this is apart here. That is a pretty good looking area just because it is very flat and very defined. You can see this is really deep out here, but just kind of on this screen, you know, that right there is basically an underwater point. You can see where it comes out. That is somewhere where they would spawn. That's somewhere they would spawn. You know, some of these areas, you know, this is actually a bay over here. They would definitely spawn there as well. So kind of looking backwards, you know, the fish are going to be out deeper during the winter and they're wanting to get to here. So each stage of that water temperature, they're getting closer and closer to where they're going to spawn. So those are some prime locations there. Okay, same thing here. You know, this is another area that really looks like a good spawning area just because of how flat it is. So is this. And it's kind of hard to tell, but if this was accessible to a boat or this creek over here, or even just deep enough for fish to get into, they're going to get in there to spawn because that's going to be somewhere that's going to be protected for them. You know, it's going to be easier for them to spawn back there and be protected. So those areas leading into this area, that is a prime location to find fish that are wanting to spawn. And I don't remember which lake this is from, and I can't remember if this is somewhere you can actually get into, but if it's a couple feet deep and the bottom is fairly hard, fish are going to be moving in there to spawn. So all these areas, they're going to be staging out here, starting with these. This looks like a good wintering hole because it's 30 feet out here, and then they're going to slowly move up each step of the spawn, racing to here. So your job is to intercept them as they're moving up and as they're getting there. This is another area that, oh, this is actually really deep is what that one is. So never mind on that one, but down here you can see this would be a good spawning area. This would be too. It's a little bit deep over here, but up along this island, you know, so again, all these areas leading up to there are places that you're going to look for when they're getting ready to spawn. And what we're talking about, the pre-spawn fishing. Okay. Okay, I'm trying to think. Oh, I remember where this is. Okay, so this is another area that is a very good spawning area that they always catch giant fish on. This is Lake Coeur d'Alene in Idaho. And this is a place where people always catch them. So during the spawn. So again, pre-spawn, you're going to be stepping back. You're going to be out here. So right before they spawn, they're going to be here. And as it's colder, they're going to be out further. So these are where they're going to eventually be. So you got to just find out where they're going to be at that time and just know that they're getting to this point. So as it gets closer to the spawn, you want to be further and further back in there. And this is also a river coming out of it. So that adds a whole other dimension because, you know, you have to take a look at water temperature. It could be, or water going, you know, either way, if the water's coming in or going out, it's going to be moving. So it's going to be colder or warmer depending on the situation. Okay, so here's another area that is prime for spawning. You see back here, I know you can get back in here, so the fish are going to be spawning here, as well as this whole shallow area, this whole flat. This is where they're going to be. So this is an awesome looking spot right here. I know what lake this is, but I haven't fished here in a few years. This is Hauser Lake in Idaho. And I know that this is a popular spawning area. There's a lot of pads there, lily pads. But this, looking at this, I've never really looked at this too closely, but that is a prime spot because it's very deep, very close to it's kind of like a highway as fish are moving up into this shallow area. That's going to be a good pre-spawn location from fish that are out deep that want to get back here. Okay, another lake in my region. I know for a fact that fish spawn like crazy up through here in all of these areas that are very shallow and very flat. So pre-spawn, fish are going to be moving up towards that. You know, again, there's actually a creek up here that's not shown on the map that they also get into. There's a few little pockets and things like that they're going to be getting into. So pre-spawn, they're going to be just back from that, wanting to get to these areas. So just keep, and if you're really close to the spawn, start shallow and then slowly move deeper and deeper, and you will intercept those fish. Okay, so cool. So tell me, you guys have any other questions? Chris wanted me to zoom out so I can see where on that lake. And I don't know which lake it was talking about at that time. Okay, great. So we got a question about Someone's seeing a lot of beds, but no fish on them yet, males or females. Where are they, and what's the best bait right now? So it kind of depends on where you were or what the weather's been doing. You know, the fish may have moved up, or the males may have moved up and made a bed, and then it got really cold and they backed away. So the chances are they're very close because they want to be back there. They want their bed. If that's the case, they're going to be really close. And if everything I'm saying was true and there's been a cold front, you're going to want to fish kind of slow, just because those fish, you know, if it was that drastic that it moved them back, you know, then it was probably really cold. So I would say things like stuff I didn't even mention in here, but, you know, more finesse stuff like drop shot, and then like jigs, like I was talking about as well. Okay, so yeah, Rick said yes, a lot of drastic changes. So that you're really close then. If those males came up and made those beds, you know, they were ready to go, and then those drastic changes backed them off. But they're going to be pretty close to it, and the females are not too far behind. Okay, another question about spawning bass. Is there any major difference with tidal water and non-tidal? Not really. I mean, as far as from what I understand, I haven't fished a lot of tidal stuff. I fished the California Delta a handful of times, but you know, there is a whole nother element there of, you know, the water dropping. So they're not going to be spawning too shallow, or it's going to be dry. But you know, as far as the general areas, they're going to be the same. But I guess that is a major difference, is that, you know, they're going to spawn a little bit deeper, just so their nest is always protected. Okay, what temperature do they start making beds? I'd say 60-ish, you know, maybe a little bit high 50s. Just depends on how eager they are, I guess. You know, it's kind of unusual. It's like, you know, different species, they spawn sooner, like I talked about. So I have seen beds a lot sooner than that, you know, maybe a little too eager, you know, well before they're going to be there. But generally, it's pretty close to when they're going to actually spawn. It doesn't happen too soon before. Okay, got a few questions coming. Anthony wants to know my opinion on the Ned rig, and you know, I think I talked about this in another one, but I'm happy to answer it again. I used to think it was stupid, and all you caught was small fish on it, but I have changed my mind because I've caught a lot of good fish on it. So it's here to stay. It's doing well in the major bass tournaments. It catches a lot of fish in a lot of situations. I'd say it's definitely a must try if you haven't, and must keep doing if you have done it. It's really good. I totally switched gears after catching some big fish on it. And you know, I thought it was just, you know, like finesse for smallmouth, but I was catching nice largemouth on it too last year. How does wind affect your presentation for smallmouth pre-spawn? You know, it can actually help. You know, kind of we were talking about that cloudy stuff. Wind can be your friend and give you an advantage of blocking up the clarity. So it can be good. But as far as presentations, you know, the biggest thing for me, I don't mind fishing in the wind. It's just the biggest thing is boat positioning and doing it effectively, making good casts and things like that. But it doesn't really affect it too much. Yeah, you're right, Greg. Super bait on Table Rock. He's talking about the Ned rig. He said it's good. It's crazy how popular it is. It's so good. It catches them. It's like the new drop shot, basically. That's another thing too. You can actually use those little Z-Man TRDs on a drop shot. That's a good bait to use on a drop shot. Side note. Okay. Do I believe that all the fish highways to bedding areas have them paralleling the shore or coming to them away from the shoreline? It just really depends if it's based on the layout of the bottom. You know, if it's a really point that gets real shallow all of a sudden, they can come from any direction, really. It really more depends on the depth. And if it's a big flat, you know, they may be coming on one side. Just kind of depends. That, you know, I think you're talking about that Hauser Lake example, and it just stood out because it looked a lot different on the map. There was those contour lines up close. It just looked like a kind of a pinch point, as they say, you know, just something different and very narrow. Michael, where are you fishing? What region? Michael asked about his tournament coming up. RJ, yes, I have tried the chicken rig. There's a video on Western Bass that was actually my hands doing it, and I do like it. And if you guys aren't familiar with the chicken rig, it's basically like a, I don't know how to describe it. I mean, I guess it's kind of like a backward shaky head where the line actually goes through the worm, and then the hook comes out and it goes back this way, and then there's a weight on the bottom. So it's really interesting, but check it out. Western Bass TV, there's a video called How to Do the Chicken Rig or something. Those are my hands. But yeah, it's a really good bait. It's just a different approach. Like I said, it's kind of like a wacky rig, kind of like a Nico rig, but it just get a lot of action out of the bait because the line is actually going through the worm. So every time you move your line at all, the bait goes crazy. So yeah, it's good. It's really good right before they spawn. It's good when they spawn, and then after they spawn when they're kind of finicky. You're welcome, Jean Sebastian. Yeah, RJ, that's a good description. It's kind of a cross between the Nico and Texas. Okay. Michael has a tournament coming up in Ohio, and he said he's had some luck with Carolina rig, 20 to 30 feet. If it gets to 50 degrees, I would say that's time to, like I talked about, time to move and throw crankbaits and cover water for sure. If it does reach 50, oh, you say it, I doubt it will reach 50. I would say still, I mean, there will be fish in that 20 to 30 foot range, but don't count out that shallow water. That's pretty dang close to when they're going to spawn. Okay. Any other questions, guys? But good luck too, Michael. Hopefully you do well. Okay. Quiet group. Okay. Well, if that's it, we'll wrap it up. And I appreciate everybody for attending. Thank you very much. It's awesome to see all these great questions. It makes it a lot easier for me. And again, I really appreciate it. If you have any questions, tbrinks@navionics.com. And that's it. So we'll see you guys later. Oh, Big Nasty has to come through. What's another question? When does spring officially arrive? Yesterday, I think, right? Or today. Either way. So, all right. See you guys.